All right, let's head into the Broncos war room. A week from the draft. The jury's still way out on Drew Lock, who had just one more touchdown pass than interception last season, his first full season as a starter. They have the 9th pick in the draft, so could maybe be in position to take maybe Trey Lance slips to that position if they like him. Now, since Peyton Manning retired ahead of the 2016 season, this is the list of starting quarterbacks. Technically, Philip Lindsay was a starting quarterback for a game last season because he played the first 4 plays under center in Week 12. That's how bad it's been for the Denver Broncos at the quarterback position. So let's talk Denver. We've got former Bronco Brady Quinn. We also have Pete Prisco. What?
That was due to COVID. That wasn't because of the quarterback play necessarily.
Yeah, sure, but they had a running back start at the quarterback position.
Because of COVID.
It's just a fact, Brady. That's all. It's just a fact. Pete, I want to start with you on this because you've talked about hearing from some around the league that the Broncos could be interested in trading for Teddy Bridgewater. Is that something on the table right now for Denver?
Yes, it's definitely on the table, and I think they'll wait until after the draft. But I'm hearing from people around the league that the Broncos are willing to pass on taking a quarterback because they want to see what they have in Drew Lock, but they also want to bring in a veteran like Teddy Bridgewater maybe to push him a little bit. They like Drew Lock. They like a lot of the things they saw from him, and they feel like it might be too early to give up on him, which is why I think they're going to pass on a quarterback in that spot. Now, they could trade down and get out of there if somebody wants to go up and get a quarterback and get extra picks, but I do think that they'll pass on taking a quarterback. Even though George Paton, the new general manager, didn't draft Drew Lock, I think you got to give him another year and see what he has.
I'm not so sold on this. I actually think there's a potential chance that Denver could take a quarterback if the right guy falls to them at 9, and that would kind of exclude, obviously, that scenario Pete talked about where they trade back out of the spot. And also, I mean, if they were going to do this trade for Teddy Bridgewater, it would probably make sense to do it after the draft, both for their own clarity's sake, if they were potentially going to make that decision to take a quarterback if one falls to them at 9. But look, if it was me, I wouldn't take one only because I still would like to see more from Drew Lock. You know, last year in his first year starting, obviously there was issues with COVID, as we pointed out, but also with what was out around him. I mean, Courtland Sutton is #1 wide receiver. He went down. You had a couple rookies in Jerry Jeudy who never really came along last year. KJ Hamler as well. Tim Patrick really ended up kind of being the hero, stepping in a big way for them last year. So, you know, to me, I would love to see a season where you've got a little bit more continuity, you've got a little bit more chemistry with the guys you're actually playing with to truly see what he's capable of doing before they move on from him. So that would be my take on it.
Brady, you said that if the right guy falls to 9, that they might pull the trigger on a quarterback. Who would the right guy be, in your opinion?
It's Justin Fields. If Justin Fields is still there at 9 because of some of the news that's recently been reported about, he's got a condition with epilepsy, and maybe that would potentially scare teams off, even though Alan Faneca had a Hall of Fame career playing with it, and obviously it didn't impact him at Ohio State at all. If that was a potential guy that dropped to them, of course they'd take him. Zach Wilson, if he wasn't taken by the Jets, or maybe even potentially Mac Jones. When you look at how they're built, they're going to run the football well there in Denver. Mike Munchak's on that staff. He's the best offensive line coach in the league, so they're going to be able to run the football protected from that standpoint. And they've got a bunch of guys he can distribute the football to at the wide receiver position. So I think if either one, Mac Jones, Fields, and any of those guys fell, I could potentially see them taking them there. Look, I'm not as high on Trey Lance as other people are. I just think if that's the guy you want to come in and play right away, and maybe in this scenario he wouldn't have to, but I still think, top 10 for only one season of playing at a lower level, it's still a little rich for me.
Back to the draft in just a moment, but want to kind of recap what Denver did in free agency. Pete, they went out and they signed a couple of cornerbacks in Ronald Darby and Kyle Fuller. How do you think they did on the free agent market?
Well, they had to sign 2 corners because they were a mess at that spot, but they need more there. And I do like the additions of both those guys, but now they need a third one. You got to play with 3 in this league, and I don't know if they have a third one capable of lining up and being effective. So another one would make some sense. Look, the whole thing, and Brady's right, injuries just crippled that team last year and crippled the offense. And I think getting Sutton back and, pairing him with Judy, who's going to be a better in his second year. I think Fant has emerged as a big play weapon. I think they're going to be better on offense, but you can always use help on the offensive line. I think they could use some more help on their defensive line, but I think they had a nice free agency picking up those 2 corners.
Yeah, I'm with Pete. I mean, they needed help in the secondary in particular. That's kind of been the calling card for Vic Fangio just from his time with the Chicago Bears and obviously with Denver. I mean, their defense has kept them in a lot of games, in part because of that pass rush, even though over the course of his tenure, they've dealt with injuries to Bradley Chubb and obviously Von Miller, and now you're looking at a secondary that could use some help. So even though they had the addition of Fuller, who knows the system well from his time in Chicago, as well as Ronald Darby, who's played some good football, they still need to look at that number 9 spot very seriously and decide, do we want to potentially take a quarterback that drops to us if that happens? If not, they're going to get the first pick at a cornerback. And it's going to either be Patrick Surtain, in my opinion, which it should be, Jaycee Horn, or Caleb Farley. And I think that would go a long way for what this team really needs at this point, because it's more defensive than anything else. I think when you look at this roster, you're saying inside linebacker, cornerback, that's really the need. I think the secondary needs are the offensive line, as Pete touched on.
You think the bigger need is quarterback or cornerback at this point for the draft?
I think cornerback, because I still want to see more from Drew Lock. I think there's been times where he's played some good football, and there's been some times where he's put in some bad spots. And so I'd love to see how he plays with another year offseason, and granted, it's going to be a different system under his belt, but still, one in which he can kind of learn and grow from this, because he's had some change over his time there. So I'd like to see what that looks like, even though it's not going to be much of an offseason with COVID. Still another year under his belt, and really how he plays this year. And after this year, you're going to know, whether or not he is the guy. That may happen at some point during the season.
Pete, CB over QB as far as draft needs for the Broncos?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And again, they did add 2, but you need 3. And I think getting a good young one that you could build around would be a real help to that defense. Also, linebacker. And people will look at it and say, well, Alexander Johnson's a good player. I like him. Josey Jewell, do you want to play with him again? I mean, that's another question for them. Defensive line as well. But I think corner over quarterback for me, because I want to see what Drew Lock can do.
Okay, so at 9, there's a lot of possibilities. I mean, you could have one of those top quarterbacks fall to the 9th position. Pete had 2 of those top 5 quarterbacks falling into the teens in his latest mock draft, but most of them from Ryan Wilson have had the Broncos going cornerback at that number 9 spot.
Yeah, it just makes the most sense because of their scheme. I mean, that is a scheme that's incredibly reliant on their cornerbacks on the outside being able to lock down opponents. Whether it's in man-to-man coverage or some of their post-high zone coverage, they play what's called a match zone. And so it's going to require that cornerback essentially to play man-to-man principles on the outside. And Pete hit the nail on the head. Look, the majority of defenses now play nickel, which 3 cornerbacks on the field, because they're seeing 3 wide receivers or 2 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, but 1 tight end that looks like a wide receiver, and they've got to be able to cover those guys. And so it's now more of a prerequisite to have 3 in the game, and you're mostly playing your base nickel. And so if you could find a guy like Jaycee Horn, who has the size and length to play press man-to-man coverage and stop a guy before he gets started and has great ball skills and instincts, that would be a big-time win. But that's the good part for Denver is they get their pick of the big 3, as I'll call them, in this cornerback class, whether it's a Farley, Horn, or Surtain. At number 9, I think that's where the run on cornerback starts in the first round.
I agree with you 100%. I do think that Micah Parsons might be in play if they decide that his off-the-field stuff is okay as well. Maybe they get a playmaking linebacker. And if this were a deeper draft in terms of the edge rush, the premium edge rush guys aren't there. At some point, they're going to have to replace Von Miller. I mean, he's coming back, but at some point, you have to replace him. There just isn't anybody right there in that spot to replace him. So I think corner, I would take, if they have the 9 pick and all 3 corners on the board, I would take Patrick Surtain, but I could easily see it being Jaycee Horn. I don't think it's going to be Caleb Farley, but Micah Parsons is also in play in that spot as well.
Yeah, Pete had him taking Micah Parsons in his mock draft. Pete's going to have a couple more mocks for us next week ahead of the draft, which begins on Thursday. Thursday. Brady, when you look ahead to day 2, I know you're looking at a couple edge guys as well for Denver.
Yeah, I think, look, whatever edge guy that falls out of the first round, Pete mentioned it earlier in today's show, potentially a guy like Greg Russo, who, in my opinion, is a first-round talent. I think if he gets to the first or second round, he's going to be a steal for a team. There's just too much upside there. This is a young player at that position who is 6'7". So I don't think he'll be there for them. So some other guys down the line, Quincy Roche out of Miami, he's another guy that's incredibly impressive. I think he fits that mold or role of what they're looking at. Chris Rumpf from Duke, he's got some explosiveness. As far as interior guys, these are more kind of mid, maybe late round picks when you're looking at a J2 Fele out of USC. I like to call him a dancing bear with the way he's able to rush and get penetration. Marvin Wilson was impactful too at times, even though he didn't have the greatest pro day as far as what he looked like. You know, Pete touched on Micah Parsons. If they don't get Micah Parsons at 9 and they do take a cornerback, I love Monty Rice at some point after that in this draft, or even Justin Hilliard in those later rounds out of actually Ohio State with the way that he played this year in some of those roles. But guys like Paulson Adebo, Kerry Vincent at the cornerback spots, I think you don't hurt yourself adding some depth if Ronald Darby doesn't look out at one of those guys. And then Chuba Hubbard, you know, they could use a little explosiveness at the running back spot. He, to me, is going to be a steal for some team in this year's draft.
You know what Brady did? He just took Ryan Wilson's 7-round mock draft and told him to make a graphic out of it. So put every guy in the
well, I'm promoting his. He does 7 rounds. You only do 1 round. So I mean, I got to promote someone's.
I mean, how many guys do you have? 20?
Don't get mad at me for doing the research. I mean, I'm the one doing the research over here.
Well, I do the research. They don't want a graphic that goes around the block. I have a lot of the same guys. By the way, I have Stokes as well. I think if they don't get a corner in the first round, he would make some sense. I think Asante Samuel, if you don't get a corner in the first round, would also. Tyson Campbell, Elijah Molden. And then I think linebacker. I think Nick Bolton from Missouri is another guy that could be there and help them. And Chaz Surratt down the line could also be a linebacker they would look at. So I'm with you, though, Brady. If there's an edge rusher that's intriguing to me, it's Quincy Roche. And I think he would fit with exactly what they want to do. I think he's going to be a better player than a lot of scouts and personnel people are giving him credit for. So that's a good one. I like that one of your list of 63 guys.
Pete's just upset because, you know, the bigger the list that you put on the screen,
right,
the smaller the type, and he's getting to the age where you can't really see it.
You can't read it. Yeah.
By the way, Nick Bolton, who was on Pete's list, is also on Ryan Wilson's list. So if anybody's copying, it's Pete. Ryan Wilson has them taking Nick Bolton in the 2nd round of the draft. So that's the Broncos for you in an interesting year for Denver. We'll see what they do at the quarterback position. Probably not going to make the postseason. They're plus 170 and minus 340 to make it with an over-under win total of 7 and a hook.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.